the purpose, the deeper purpose, is very important. Probably the greater, when we create for others, when we offer a genuine desire to care for others through our work, and of course art, it's endless the ways in which art can be expressed, we're actually nourishing the souls of other people. Just like when you say, I love you, je t'aime, ich liebe dich, whatever. If the other person feels, hey, you've really moved me, just see that. Sometimes young couples, when they're holding hands or something like that, it's very moving to see, the innocence of love is very special. Innocence is such a special thing, especially because love is given innocently. There's people who have cell phones with nice music that they play and all kinds of things like that. They should actually have cell phones that play, some really great music. The music of Joshua Cotter and people famous like that. But when we express art, we're nourishing the souls of other people. And when we appreciate art, we're nourishing our own souls. I once had a job in New York for a number of years where it was a very difficult job, but if anybody wanted to see me, I'd walk up to the Metropolitan Museum or the Morgan Library or the Whitney or whatever, and the art would give me, oh yeah, now I feel I can go back and fight the good fight. It was the art that actually nourished my soul rather than the organization I was working with, which was dedicated to nourishing souls. So that's one of the ironies of life. But art nourishes that, and we appreciate art for our own sake. We nourish our own souls. Going in to see a work of art is very, very special. When you go encounter work. When I go to New York, there's Hans Memling's Boy with a Carnation at the Morgan Library. Whenever I go to New York, I pay my respect to certain friends. I go to the Morgan Library. How are you, Hans? Nice to see you. Memling, if you ever go there, just to the right as you go into the actual library itself, pay respects to Hans Memling and the Boy with a Carnation. You go to the Metropolitan, those Renaissance portraits of, not famous, wealthy patrons. Wow, amazing. Those portraits are just incredible, much better than photographs. I mean, they come alive, they're life. And then you see those and you come out and say, well, yeah, I was with some Renaissance friends of mine this afternoon. It makes you feel like, hey, they were really serious. The most powerful work of art, I believe, is something that is in the Vatican, and it's by Michelangelo. And that work of art is, I think we got it, the Pietà. The dead Christ is in the hands and the arms of his mother. It's in marble. It looks like it's in flesh. It's the most powerful sculpture that I know. And the reality of that is, here's a mother who's offered her son, who's offered himself to the world. I mean, the levels of sacrifice, the levels of love. I mean, if that doesn't move a world, I don't know what will. I mean, you offer your son, your child, to the world, and he offers his life for the sake of the world. I mean, and the beauty of it is just so extraordinary. So great art can awaken the greatness within us. That's the power of art. It can transform us at its best. It's like the power of love expressed. It is love expressed in a form of beauty. And therefore, it holds up those ideals. That's why it's so ennobling to be around great works of art, just like it's ennobling to be around great friends. I try with my children, as they were growing, always to have my children around the best people that I knew, because I felt they would be somehow uplifted or ennobled by those people. I have a nephew now who's in corporate life, and he's talking about all the difficulties. So I want to introduce him to certain friends I have that are involved in corporate life that are really wonderful people. That's the way we nourish people. They have to be exposed to works of art or works of human art that nourish the soul. So Lewis Mumford, for example, the famous art critic and historian of architecture, has a great book, The City, emphasized that buildings can either ennoble us, just being with the building and feeling close to it and feeling, wow, this building makes me feel more human, so to speak. You have to sort of get yourself together. Actually, a friend of mine, even when we were going to this museum, And before we went into the museum, he put his tie on. I said, well, what are you putting your tie on for? Well, it's respect for the works of art. And I got it. I said, yeah, of course. That was his way of showing respect for the works of art. The same thing with other people. You want to be at your best. And, this you put on, okay, it's clean, it's nice, and, hopefully it's pleasing to the audience. Why? Because you wanted to offer something beautiful to someone else. Everything you do, every word, every gesture, every action is something that creates something more beautiful, or it doesn't. And same thing with the things that we create. Now, Mumford would also point out that certain buildings overwhelm us. These glass and metal buildings, you walk, the rest of New York is just overwhelming. People, if you're not used to New York City and you're walking around, you feel exhausted after a few hours because the buildings are not your friends. They say, hey, buddy, this is New York, huh? Watch it, I'll break your nose. That's New York. So unless you're in there and you know New York and stay away from the guys who want to break your nose and just hang around the good buildings, you can be debilitated by what is poor art. So again, cities can be, just like we were saying earlier, cities can be designed to enhance the quality of human life, or they can be designed to make as much money as possible. A program in San Francisco, on the marina, they wanted to build a huge apartment house, and people felt, no, this is a place where we play and walk, and you can't do that. And there was a big battle with the zoning commission, and it got shot down. People of San Francisco, even when the highway, the freeway was part of the Embarcadero, the earthquake knocked it down. What did the people of San Francisco do? Said, we don't want it rebuilt, and we want to daylight the whole area, and they built a promenade, and it's one of the great areas in San Francisco. Why? Are we there just for cars to go from point A to point B as quickly as possible? Or are we there as human beings to walk and they have the greatest farmers market, maybe the biggest one in the universe, right near the Ferry Building on Saturdays. It's extraordinary, and on other days as well. And it's so much fun just looking and walking in the sunshine, because the sunshine can come in. There's no freeway above it. And it's just simple. And they put all these palm trees there, and, it was a very humane thing to do, and it brings great joy. Families are there, people are walking, bicycles, all kinds of stuff like that. That's a city that's a very humane city. So also art that is superficial or absurd mocks value and purpose. There have been movements in art like Dadaism. So Dadaism they were looking for a name for their movement. They opened the dictionary and they put in here, Dada means hobby horse, whatever that means. So a hobby horse. So what did the Dada artists do? A Dada poet would read his poetry, meanwhile a siren would be going off right next to him. Or another form of Dada poetry, put words in a bag, shake them out, and then take one word after another and make a poem. That's Dadaism. Profound purpose, uplifting human spirit. I mean, the mockery, cynicism is so pervasive in art, the desire to mock the world, rather than to uplift the world. Do we need any more satirical art to mock every institution? I mean, where is art that celebrates the joy of parents for children? Where is art that celebrates the ideal of grandparents for children and grandchildren? I mean, these are the high points of life as far as I know. So any significant work of art will be motivated by a loving purpose, be it serious or playful. It can be many kinds of art, and it can be uplifting in many different ways. But again, if you think of what the important things are in life, relationship, quality of love that nourishes the human spirit, that allows people to think of generations in the future, not just the ethic of present thinking, but rather the ethic of how will what I create move people hundreds of years from now. Michelangelo's statue was done 400 years ago. You don't think he was thinking about some universal spirit? Whatever person he was moved by a profound ideal in creating that culture. So the reality is we have to make good choices in terms of what we create. There are positive examples of modern art, much of which I feel is demeaning. It doesn't seek to uplift, it seeks to somehow trick or fool you rather than uplift you. Henry Moore sculpture, even on the University of California, Berkeley campus, it celebrates this family, parents and a child. It's a unique form, it's movement sort of, and it's abstract, but it's here, this group there. I've seen it many times during different times of light and dark, and it's sort of a friend again because it celebrates the ideal of a family. Alvin Ailey's dance company, it's an African-American dance company, incorporates gospel music into their dance. And it's fabulous. Oh, sinner boy, where you going to run to? Oh, sinner boy. And then it's fabulous. Using gospel music and dance celebrates the greatest, the best of African-American culture in a modern form, in a modern expression. Those things, if you've never seen Alvin Ailey's Revelations, it'll be a revelation when you see it. It's one of the most powerful examples of modern dance. And maybe you can actually Google, YouTube, part of it. Even, the 1920s, 1930s in Harlem was called the Harlem Renaissance. A lot of painters and poets and other artists who celebrated the beauty of African-American culture using very honorable, noble themes. James Weldon Johnson, for example, was a poet during that period in the Harlem Renaissance. And he has this poem which, again, draws upon biblical ideas, draws upon the past, yet in a modern vernacular, in the language of the time. And it's called The Creation. And God stepped out on space, and he looked around and said, I'm lonely. I'm going to make me a world. And as far as the eye of God could see, darkness covered everything, blacker than 100 midnights down in the cypress swamps. Then God smiled, and a light broke, and the darkness rolled up on one side, and the light stood shining on the other, and God said, that's good. Then God reached out and took the light in his hands, and God rolled the light around in his hands until he made the sun. And he set that sun ablazing in the heavens. And the light that was left from making the sun, God gathered it up in a shining bowl and flung it against the darkness, spangling the night and with the moon and the stars. Then down between the darkness and the light, he hurled the world, and God said, that's good. Then God himself stepped down, and the sun was on his right hand, and the moon was on his left. The stars were clustered about his head. And God walked, and where he trod, his footsteps hollowed the valleys and bulged the mountains up. And he stopped and looked and saw that the earth was hot and barren. So God stepped over to the edge of the world, and he spat out the 7 seas. He batted his eyes, and the lightning flashed. He clapped his hands, and thunders rolled. And the waters above the earth came down. The cooling waters came down. Then the green grass sprouted, and the little flowers blossomed. The pine tree pointed his finger to the sky, and the oak spread out his arms. The lakes cuddled down in the hollows of the ground, and the rivers ran down to the sea. And God smiled again, and the rainbow appeared and curled itself around his shoulder. Then God raised his arm, and he waved his hand over the sea and over the land, and he said, bring forth, bring forth. And quicker than God could drop his hand, fishes and fowls and beasts and birds swam the rivers and the seas, roamed the forests and the woods, and split the air with their wings. And God said, that's good. Then God walked around, and God looked around on all that he had made. He looked at his sun, he looked at his moon, and he looked at his little stars. He looked on his world with all the living things, and God said, I'm lonely still. Then God sat down on the side of a hill where he could think. By a deep, wide river he sat down. With his head in his hands, God thought and thought till he thought, I'll make me a man. Up from the bed of the river, God scooped the clay, and by the bank of the river he kneeled him down. And there the great God Almighty, who lit the sun and fixed it in the sky, who flung the stars to the most far corners of the night, who rounded the earth in the middle of his hand, this great God, like a mammy bending over her baby, kneeled down in the dust, toiling over a lump of clay till he shaped it in his own image. Then into it, he blew the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Amen. Amen. So art can be uplifting. It can nourish the soul if we have principles to guide us in terms of who we are, our purpose, our value, and if we understand that what we create, our words, our gestures, our behavior, can reflect those first principles or can be diminished by having no first principles, we then end up with chaos, with cynicism, with a dark spirit that undermines the best of human life. A principled view of ideals and values is reflected in works of art, many types of works of art. That's our challenge, to create works of art and a life that is worthy of our nature and our purpose. Thank you.
Take a couple questions.
Oh, yeah. James Weldon Johnson. Just because you asked, you can have this poem, because you're such a good person. There's a lady waving to me in the audience. Oh, you're just waving, lady? I see. Did you turn your phone off, lady?
Wouldn't you say then that basically art's just, with a psychological point of view, art is just a reflection of the person that creates it. So again, we should actually focus more on transforming ourselves and each other.
Well, you're right in terms of it reflects the person who
Art will be the art that we're seeking.
Right. In other words, if you're guided by a profound purpose in your life, it's like when I talk about a person who's really a beautiful person, everything that person does he does it so well in terms of beautifully doing things. He does the right things, makes the right choices. That's what I think of. In fact, one of my best friends, I say, well, he has no ego, meaning he's always out there creating, doing, building, saying, that's the kind of person I like to hang around. People are just out there doing it rather than talking about it or creating something that is really cynical. It's so easy to be cynical in any organization or any activity because we all fall short of what we would be, what we'd like to do. And if we focus on that, then it weakens us. That's why it's necessary. The best of religion and principles is that it constantly brings us up so that we don't fall short of ourselves. That's why people pray. That's why they study, ideally. That's why they act, and do charitable works to develop the altruistic heart. That's the best of our culture, that we have so many people, as I mentioned earlier, with this Philippine tragedy, immediately everybody's thinking, how can we help? Where do we send the money? Where do we send the food? Immediately, that's the best of culture. We should feel that way in other situations besides when there's a disaster. That's the goal. And again, that's why a religion at its best, you work on maturing yourself, developing your spiritual life while you're also contributing to a community. Religious communities at their best are wonderful places because everybody's looking, how can I contribute and do my best and look good and whatever. Other communities, this relative of mine got involved with young people who are not so constructive. They drink, and it's not that drinking is bad, but everything they got involved with was like, hey, how can we get this or that? And he spent a huge amount of money on a car when he has to support his family, and bad choices. Then make for you get weaker. You don't strengthen those spiritual muscles. We have to make good choices all our life. It never ends, or else the muscles get weak, and then. Thank you so much for participating in this global project.